Hello, I'm Tiffany, creator of Red Petal Patterns. This is Knitting Basics for Beginners, and today I'm going to talk about texture. There are a few very common textures in knitting, and you probably already know it without knowing it. When you look at the cuff of your sweater, or even a sweatshirt, you will notice that there's like ridges in it, and it stretches, and you can see that there's different lines in it, and then it goes back, and the cuff is a little bit tighter and a little bit stretchier and has more bounce back, almost like elastic in it. It happens at the top of your sock versus the foot of your sock, your cuff, sometimes collars, button bands, your waistband, that little cinched in section without actually being elastic. That is called ribbing. And the way that it is performed is a series of knits and purls stacked on top of each other. And we've talked about stockinette stitch and garter stitch, so you're going to recognize this. That's your lovely garter stitch that you had before. This happens in garter if you knit every single row, and it happens in reverse garter if you purl every single row. And there are times that you will need to know the difference depending on the design being done. This is usually done to make an elastic edge on the vertical edges, and you can see it adds some stretch. Another reason that you want to put ribbing in is to keep it from curling. We've talked about the nature of knit before, and the fact that knit will always curl towards the ends will always curl towards the purl side, and the edges will always curl, towards the knit side, and the edges will always curl towards the purl side. So you're always fighting that. The way that you get it to lay straight is you mix up your knits and purls, and then it doesn't curl. And again, this is generally used on the vertical edges, and then for the horizontal work, you do a series of knit and purl on top of each other. And this is one by one, meaning we have one knit stitch, one purl stitch, one knit stitch, one purl stitch, all the way across. You're going to keep doing that. And then when you get to the end, you flip it around, and this one has a purl stitch, a knit stitch, a purl stitch, and a knit stitch. And I've told you before how to tell the difference in that your purl stitches have that little collar, and your knit stitches have a V. And that's going to be true either way. In my patterns, I call this as it lays, as it presents. So when you turn a knit stitch, the purl side of that stitch is now facing you. So as it presents, this side it's a knit, and this side it's a purl. So if you are supposed to be knitting it as it presents, that means, or knitting it as it lays, that means if it's a purl facing you, you're going to do a purl. And if it's a knit facing you, you're going to do a knit. And you're going to do that on both sides so that you have a column that's the same direction all the way up for as many rows as it calls for. And you will sometimes see sweaters that will call for garter on the edge and ribbing in the middle, because this is just really nice and built in. You don't have to go later and pick it up and add it on or sew it on in a regular ribbing. And this just makes a very easy edge to work with. Now, the really fun thing about this type of ribbing is that you can do it so that it's reversible. You can see this is the same on both sides. As long as you make it in even amounts, it will always, so as long as they're the same, so 1 to 1, 1 to 1, 1 to 1, and the same thing here, every row. As long as you do that, an even amount of your knit and purl, knit, purl, knit, purl, it will always be reversible. So you could do a scarf in nothing but rib stitch or garter stitch, and it's reversible and it will not curl. And if you do 1 and 1 and you pulled on it, you actually would not even know that that was ribbed stitch if it was just a scarf sitting on somebody's neck. And it would be thick and it would not curl, and it would just look like knit, just smooth knit. But it also has the stretch, so you can see why that's a really nifty tool to have for the edge of a sweater that's going to be all knit, is that if it didn't get pulled, it will blend in with the knit stitches above it and not be quite as obvious. Now I said as long as you do it, and as long as your knits and your purls are the same amount, I shouldn't say even, because 1 is in an even number, but as long as your knits and purls are the same amount, your work will be reversible. So this is worked in 2 by 2. Meaning I had 2 knits, 2 purls, 2 knits, 2 purls. And you have seen this before on the edge of chunky hats or chunky knits. You've seen this 2 by 2. And this is completely reversible. So it's still 2 by 2 over here. And that is literally knit 2, purl 2, knit 2, purl 2, knit 2, purl 2. And you'll flip it around and you'll put knits on top of knits and purls on top of purls. 2, 2, 2, 2, and 2. To get the 2 by 2 garter is a little trickier in that instead of knitting every single row or purling every single row, you will knit a row, purl a row. So that will actually make just a little band of garter of stockinette, and then on the next row you will reverse it and you will purl on top of the knits, and then you'll roll over and you will knit on top of the knits so that you have 2 rows the same. And then when you get to the next one, you'll reverse it again. And so you are actually doing 2 rows of knit, 2 rows of purl, 2 rows of knit, and 2 rows of purl, so that whichever side you're on is going to mirror that. And you already know that this is called stockinette stitch. So if this side was facing you, this is reverse stockinette, stockinette, reverse stockinette. And that's how the knit and purl works. In order to do these, you also need to remember not to twist your stitches, because you're knitting and purling next to each other. If you tend to change direction of your stitches as you work, you're going to need to remember when you turn it around to pay attention to which way your stitches are sitting. So when I turn my work around, you can see that the knit stitches are sitting with the front leg not going first. The back leg is actually going first on this. And my purl stitches, the front leg is going first. So when I flip this around, I would need to purl in the front and knit in the back. Same thing when I turn this around. So once I do that round, it will change this row because of the way I wrap my stitches. So sometimes I knit in the front, sometimes I knit in the back. It depends on how the stitches are sitting. And after a while, you'll be able to just feel it when they change direction. You can feel if your thumb is slightly first or if your finger is slightly first. If you've got your thumb and your finger on each stitch, you'll feel that your finger is a little further ahead, or here that your thumb is a little further ahead. And you'll be able to actually feel those as you go along, and that kind of helps. Now, working these same knits and purls, you can do really simple textures, and these are excellent for washcloths because they give it a really nice bumpy feeling. So I talked about reverse stockinette and reverse garter, and I've talked about the knit one, purl one ribbing. Then you can get into a little bit more complicated. This is called seed stitch. And let me see if I can get a close-up of this. This is you knit, purl, knit, purl, knit, purl, knit, purl, knit, purl. Every other stitch, knit, purl, knit, purl, knit, purl, knit, purl, all the way across your row. And when you turn it around, you will knit on top of your purls and purl on top of your knits. So you're going to do the opposite as from the way it presents when you turn it around. So if you ended with a knit stitch, when you turn it around, that's going to look like a purl stitch. So you will start with a knit stitch on top of that purl. And you are going to change your alternating. Every single row gets the opposite of the one before it. If you were to do 2 rows, so you would do the front of your work. This is called moss stitch. You would do the front of your work, and you would have a knit and a purl and a knit and a purl and a knit and a purl. And then you turn it around, and you will knit on top of your knit and purl on top of your purl. And then you'll come back around to your front side, and you will switch it. So you will do 2 rows the same, and then alternate your pattern. And this is the exact same movements as doing the ribbing, the 1x1 ribbing. But instead of never changing it or changing it every row, this is every 2 rows. That is called a 2-row repeat. Because you do these 2 rows, and then you do these 2 rows, and then you do these 2 rows again. Technically, I guess that would be a 4-row repeat, because you're going to do these 2 rows and these 2 rows, and then you're going to start over again. That's correct. There we go. So whatever you did on these 2 rows, you're going to do the opposite on these 2 rows, and then you're going to go back and do it again on these 2 rows. So it starts over every 4 rows. And this is an extremely simple, this is one of my absolute favorite, and it's called moss stitch. So 2 purls, 2 knits, 2 purls, 2 knits on top of each other instead of side by side. And then if you take the same thing, switching every 2 rows, but you do 2 knits, 2 purls, 2 knits, 2 purls instead of 1, you get double moss. And it's not showing up as lovely as it is in real life. And this is a knit, knit, purl, purl, knit, knit, purl, purl. Turn it around, work it as it presents, come back to the front side, and alternate, so that you're putting knits on top of purls and purls on top of knits. Those are the 3 absolute simplest textures to perform. They make excellent scarves and washcloths. They are super simple to work. So, one by one, changes every row, seed stitch. One by one, changes every 2 rows, moss stitch. 2 by 2, changes every 2 rows, double moss. And those are my 3 favorite textures to work with, but this is definitely my most favorite. There is no curling when you do this in a little bit looser gauge, so a little bit bigger needle. It's got a marvelous drape to it. And I said it won't curl. It's got stretch in either direction. This does not need to be blocked because there are no open holes. And nothing's going to curl on you. And it's super simple to work up. And it's reversible. It's the same on both sides. So it also does well, like I said, dishcloths, scarves, things that you're going to see, blankets, things that you're going to see both sides of. It works either way. Ribbing can be done in uneven numbers. One of my favorites is 3-1 or 2-1. That is not reversible, but I think it makes a really lovely texture. And you can just play with those. It's fine. You can play with yarn. You can make samples. You can play around with the numbers. You can practice new stitches on a little swatch. Just buy some cheap yarn and have fun with it. And figure out these textures and how you like to use them. And play around with what your pattern says you can do. And figure out things like mixing textures. If you were to put, this is a 20 stitch swatch, so there's 10 stitches across the ribbing and 10 stitches across the garter. And you would put a stitch marker in here and just make sure you do the ribbing on one side and the garter on the other. You can play around with the different textures and how you want to make your borders and your edges. You can use this garter stitch and one of the other seed or moss stitch in the center and make a really nice washcloth that won't roll. Same thing with a scarf. You can do a border on it. You can do a hat now because you know how to do the ribbing on the edge. There's a lot of fun that can be had with just mixing up knits and purls, as long as you don't twist your stitches. And I hope you have fun practicing that, and I will see you next time. Bye.